All right, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is our third episode of Last Month in Security. We've got a special guest today, John Miller, our fearless leader.
I'm definitely special.
He is very
They
special.
called me special my whole childhood.
John is the CEO of Halcyon. We've also got our regular panel here, Ryan Golden, our CMO, and our field CISO, advisory CISO. Soon to be a different CISO, maybe?
Yeah, you never know.
Okay, we'll see. Ben Carr. So thank you for joining, gentlemen.
Absolutely.
And there's so much to talk about that's happened in this last month. We've kind of got a packed show. We're going to start with some Change Healthcare attack updates, as there's been a lot of movement on that. So if you're not aware, if you've been under a rock somewhere, Change Healthcare is one of the largest healthcare payment providers in the country, if not the largest. One of.
Double check.
But they're basically moving billions of dollars a day in payments, and they got hit by a pretty nasty ransomware attack back in February that basically bricked their systems, which meant it bricked the ability for healthcare providers to get paid by insurance companies. It may have affected 1 in 3 individuals across the nation. We covered this in the last show. A lot of impact. People couldn't get their medications. People had to get hospitalized. We had clinics going under because that had been around for 25, 30 years.
Yeah, I think that healthcare is getting the most impacted by ransomware, and people don't even realize it yet, right? Where, it must have been like 4 months ago, researchers at the University of Minnesota put out a report where they went through Medicare data and figured out that we've been losing on average 1 person a month for the last 5 years. Just Medicare, subscribers.
Hospitalized Medicare patients.
Yeah,
went from an average of 2 a month dying to 3 a month dying, which is
it's crazy, increase. Right? Like we're actually having Americans die now, and we're still treating this like it's, the Chinese hacking to steal some data that nobody knows what they're ever going to do with it.
Yeah.
It's going to be one of the biggest ripple effects that we've seen. Right, it's definitely not isolated to IT infrastructure. This is real people getting impacted daily.
Yeah, well, and there's real dollars involved with this. 872.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm like, whenever in the history of America do you get away with killing dozens of Americans, men, women, children, and everyone just ignores it?
Yeah,
right?
but I think because it's a cyber incident, it's almost treated like it's different, right? It's ethereal. It's not a real we don't associate the tangible with the intangible, and I think that's the thing that's frustrated me. I think it crystallized and it started really with Colonial, of something that hit with a large enough impact where it affected the economy of the U.S. as a whole, right? But that now we've seen that with Change Healthcare, it's gotten even worse, right? And I think you're right. Like we could trace this back to real bodies, but the problem is, again, ethereal to real. It's really hard to look at it and say, well, I can put my finger on it and say this body was directly tied to this. It's that lack of that direct connection with evidence that causes the problem, but that's what it is, right?
Yeah, and there's some, right? It started with it was one of the first stats I used when I was raising for the company at the origin of Halcyon was a baby died.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason that it came out was a ransomware attack was the parents actually sued. Right. But we're at a spot now where it's like 1 in 5 hospitals in the United States have undergone a ransomware attack now. And I think it's pretty obvious that what we're doing to stop this at a bigger, level isn't working. Right? Like the attacks are getting bigger. They're getting more dangerous. You hit the nail on the head. Like Colonial Pipeline showed that they were willing to take down critical infrastructure, and there was no real response to it.
Yeah.
Right?
Zero
like nobody went to jail for that. Right. Nobody got hacked back.
Well,
right?
Rest assured, though, there's some light at the end of the tunnel where I believe Change is offering 2 years of free credit monitoring
Thank God.
for everybody that's impacted, which was like
didn't die
150
after the
million.
attack.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're
Yeah,
fine.
but that's good. But they haven't even actually notified anybody that they've actually been a party to this, right? Like millions and millions of people, 1 out of every 3 people in the United States likely somehow affected by this, but they're months away from actually identifying the actual scope and doing any notifications. But I'm glad they're going to offer some
They
credit
can't
monitoring.
figure that out in 4 days, Ben.
The problem with this is all of the blame is essentially traveling to the organizations that get ransomware now. So they keep coming in with legislation that freaks everyone out. They start sending, CISOs to jail and stuff. And now you get in a situation where something bad happens. Your number one concern isn't getting the business up and running and doing the right thing. It's how do you come through this without, negative legal ramifications? So keep your mouth shut.
When you think about Change Healthcare, right, and an impact of $1.6 billion,
So we had
that they reported in a
So
loss.
far, yeah.
this quarter.
Q1 loss $872 million,
Yeah.
and they anticipate that about $1.6 billion for just recovery costs.
So you think about that number, not to get you off, John, but like I put my operator hat back on. I think, okay, I'm in the seat and I'm doing the job. I go into my budget meeting on a yearly basis and I put that plan together. I want somebody to come out. I would really love, we won't tell who you are, but somebody at Change come out and tell me what was the unfunded mandate from the CISO ask last year. Because I'm telling you, there was some dollar, and I'm guaranteeing you it was lower than 1.6 billion by a great deal,
Really?
right?
That doesn't sound like a typical CISO budget to you.
Well, the whole thing is they're rebuilding, right? They're doing an MGM where they're and don't get me wrong, in so many ways it's the right thing to do. If your infrastructure has been compromised, you absolutely can go through an IR process and try to hunt everything down, but there's no way you can fully trust it again. And so they're doing a full rebuild, but not only is it outrageously expensive, it takes forever.
Months.
Yeah, look, and when you go, I think many organizations, their response to like, how do you protect against ransomware is we have backups. When were your backups last backed up? Were they actually infected? What was the dwell time of the attackers? Have you even identified that, right? And so, you bring the backups back, but to your point, I think most times, if you're really looking for how to recover, it's how do you get the data back, but you're still rebuilding, right? And then you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we build back better? I shake my head every time because, as a CISO going in, you say, hey, look, we want to be at X point. We need to put this amount of budget forward. And the response you always get is, hey, we have to put money back into the business. And start recognizing that security is part of the business. It should be your business. Especially if you're in healthcare, if you're in finance, if you're in any of those. I mean, everybody has a cyber component now, right? Everybody's IT based. There isn't a business right now that doesn't have their finance system in an IT system.
Well,
if you're
yeah, you
operating
look
out
at
of a
how-
Spiral notebook, I mean, you're one guy. But outside of that, it's IT based. So cyber should be a primary component. And we have companies that identified as top 1, 2, 3 risk, but they don't put the money in.
The businesses converted to the digital revolution as far as income goes, as far as business process goes, really fast. But yet security is still treated like it's a bolt on.
Well, it has been for so long. We've all been in this for a long, long time, and there have been bad hacks before.
Yeah, there have. Yeah.
Right? But they weren't that bad. Nobody died. There was no big consequence from it. And I feel like we've gotten to the point for the last 25 years where we've been beating everyone with, you need more security spend and you need more security spend, and the budgets have grown. And now that the economy is getting tight, money is expensive, everyone's looking to retract, right? You've seen, layoffs from Tesla and stuff like that, right? And everyone's like, well, we just spend so much in security. We've never really had a problem there before. Maybe we should, dial it back, while at the same time, the biggest threat to ever exist in kind of the cyber realm is just coming up to speed now.
Yeah,
right?
well, it's the change has been crystallized, right? So, I think, for the last 20 years, when we look at investment in cyber and what companies wanted to do, I mean, I can certainly put myself in the seat of the board of directors or the rest of the C staff and say, okay, look, we spent X dollars last year. We have an increase this year. We have an increase the next year plan. Like what's the ROI on this? Like, does it ever stop? It just keeps getting bigger. And the reality is it doesn't. It's going because we're responding to new threats and changes in the environment, right?
Well, and now they're coming faster than ever before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there weren't a lot of 0-day attacks that you really had to be worried about if you didn't have something that was important to another
If you were a defense
nation.
contractor or somebody important, this is smash and grab
Oh,
robbery.
this
it's
is
completely
well,
opportunistic.
Yeah, this
And
is
that's
your
what I was getting to.
100-person manufacturing company, and they're going to put you out of business unless
That's
you
the
figure out how to
change,
do it.
right? So that was
Yeah.
my crystallization moment. Is like, if you think about like what's the impact of cyber to business, this is it, right? Because I think for a long time it's been hard for the CISO to go in and say, okay, look, we have this potential for loss. It's brand and reputation damage. It's, we might potentially have some impact to third parties or to customers, but it's hard to put your finger on it, right?
Yeah.
But now I feel like it's super easy. It's super easy to look ransomware in the face and say, well, it changed healthcare. It's $1.6 billion of impact, but it was a $22 million ask. I still go back to and I say, the unfunded budget mandate was probably less than the $22 million that the ransomware
Look at the
act
market
was,
cap
right?
change. Just since they had to announce something like a 16% drop in their share price, it rebounded a little bit to about 8%. But that's still, for a company of that size, that's representing
it impacts the national economy.
That's 20, 30,
that's-
$40 billion. That's
my
due
question
to an
here.
IT issue. Like that's rough.
Recall this was not a healthcare provider. This
Right.
is more of a financial company, right? How many choke points are there like this? This affected hundreds of.
Yeah. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens that we could just name off right now off the top of our head. The bigger problem that I see is what's actually being done to enable the CISOs, right? Where now you have CISOs genuinely being used as a scapegoat for a CEO, right? Where previously a CEO would be held accountable and now they're holding a CISO accountable.
Is that why you hired Ben?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just wanted to clear that up.
Right. It goes back to The Simpsons. He's like Canary M. Burns. It all goes down to him. And you're so at the same time, like you're pushing these skilled people out of the industry because who wants to eat the liability of, being able to fend off an attack that's APT nation state level and, they're willing to crush you. And then, if you try not to report it, they'll report you to the SEC.
Yeah, right.
So, look, if you think about like put yourself in the seat of a CISO at any, large organization right now, right, where you're not getting the actual support you need. It's as if, you're a boxing match going to a boxer match in Vegas. And, the CEO says, oh, come over here for a second. What are you doing? Oh, I'm going to tie your hands behind your back before you go into the match. Right. Like, and I'm supposed to fight this. Like, what am I supposed to do? And that's the challenge, right? Look, I'm not an advocate of like spending whatever the dollar amount is. But I'm saying there's a rational approach to handle this that aligns with business and it's risk-based, and you enable the CISO, and even more so than the money, it's the support.
Yeah.
Right? It's going in and saying, hey, we're gonna provide you with the support you need. We're gonna back you. So when somebody in product says, hey, we can't do that because it's hard, you say, yeah, you don't have a choice, right? You've got to do it because it's the right thing to do, not only for us, but for the business and for our customers.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to spend $1 securing a 10-cent problem, right? But the problem that you get into is when you look at that equation of risk, right? The potential dollar output of the risk if something happened just keeps going up astronomically, right? And the attackers have shown that great, even if you have amazing backups and can recover, like they'll just exfil your data and extort you for that. Right? Like they're not giving up.
Where's the disconnect then? Is it that we have not had a threat like this against business?
I mean, frankly, I think a lot of CISOs have been marginalized, right? Like you're normally put under the CIO, you're given a budget, essentially you're asked to do due diligence and make sure that
You've got a
you do a
C-level
good job.
title and you're not a C-level player, right? Like it's typically you're operating at a director or maybe a VP level, right? In a lot of organizations. Now there's some that do, I think it's also reporting structures, like where it's the whole thing. Like I said, it's the support at the top, and it's taking it seriously and realizing, again, this is a piece of what we need to do business.
You have to have a CISO high enough that if he says we must do this, the organization has to listen.
Yeah.
And that normally doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's the marginalization.
It's you've turned CISOs into collaborators, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't necessarily give you the ideal security outcome that you need.
Do you think part of this is just related back to the way as the U.S. handles cyber, like at a very, very high level, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of marginalized there too, right? I mean, it's not treated in the same domain as other threats.
Yeah. I mean, for, ransomware or this threat specifically being, cyber terrorism, which is what I consider it, right? Like, they're not going after government resources. They're going after individuals and companies. I think that there's a doctrine there where, the U.S. is, for right or wrong, kind of the birthplace of computer hacking, right? And you had the NSA stand up tailored access years and years ago to really, focus on it. And they had a lot of success. But the problem is everyone's wanted to keep cyber as espionage, right? It's not terrorism, it's espionage. And because it's espionage, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? Like they're hacking us, we're hacking them, everything goes on. The second you draw that line and say, this isn't okay for us, you also have to, essentially be prepared to meet that going back. And nobody wants to give it up, right? We're very successful at using cyber for espionage. And it's all gray area, right? Like there's no clean way to draw your line through and be like, well, this ransomware guy, sure, he works at the FSB, 9 to 5, but his, LockBit activities were on his own time. And so there's no correlation between the two.
But that would never be said if, somebody in the Soviet army, right? Like who moonlights shooting people across the border, but during the day he puts on a uniform. Like, is that the difference?
Well,
really?
I think as long as that guy is shooting people that they want shot, they'd be fine with it.
But the U.S. government wouldn't be okay with it, right? Or whatever government they were shooting at. Like it gets back to this we talked about a little earlier. It's this ephemeral nature of like, I've said before, I've talked about it, I've said, look, sometimes as a CISO, it's at the end of the day, you go home and you're like, look, I just wish I was building fences because I could look at the fence and say, oh, it's successfully still up. It's built. I felt accomplished in it, right? But in cyber, it's like you build something and you can't look at it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it. So because it's not a physical, tangible item, it's hard to make the association there, right? And I think that's part of why businesses not wanted to invest because they can't see the tangibility of it. I think on the governmental side too, it's not tangible, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Right? But there's tangible results that come out of it.
I mean,
we're approaching a threshold at this point.
Well, that's the question.
I mean, people
What's
are
the
dying.
threshold?
People are done. Yes.
Yeah. But people have died, and that hasn't been the threshold, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's...
Yeah, but okay, so even the government reaction right now, just off the Change Healthcare thing. So we got Senator Mark Warner's proposed legislation called the Healthcare Cybersecurity Improvement Act, DHS. Published some healthcare-specific cybersecurity performance goals. HHS is planning regulatory changes, including to HIPAA. All of these things are aimed at the victims, more requirements for the victims. I don't see anything in the government response that says, and we're going to go to that, 70% of the dollars raised by ransomware in 21.
The other spicy thing that I love here is, so not only are they talking about like we're going to ban making ransomware payments, right? Like nobody will pay, it'll break. They've never given people the ability to protect themselves deeper. Like there's a sheriff down in Florida that does like all this social media stuff where it'll be like, oh, we caught these guys, or like this guy was breaking into a house and he got shot, and like know that if you rob people in this county, you're going to get shot. None of that exists, right? We're not going to protect you. We're going to, allow you to secure your premises, right? But I mean, the thought of going to a company and saying, these ransomware guys stole your data, right? They have it. They want you to pay them millions of dollars to not release it. And I know that you know where they are, and you might have the capabilities to hack them and delete that data. Not allowed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's over the line. You could start an international incident, for Christ's sake. Right? It's just...
Yeah,
Are we being
you could
naive
start a
then?
war. Yeah. Wait, didn't that already happen?
Yeah.
Didn't they already? Haven't they already attacked us?
That's
Like,
always been the response for hackbacks is you can't do it because you could escalate something, and it's like, okay, so I just get to stand here and let everyone
Right.
take
Also,
whatever they
my
want.
insurance premiums go up. I'm going to be, sued. There's going to be lawsuits and regulatory.
I mean,
fines.
transform this into the physical world. Like put something that everybody can associate with it, right? Because again, intangible, hard to see, right? You're at your house. You build a fence around it. Somebody drives by, gets out of their car, breaks down your fence, comes in, steals your stuff, walks out. You call the cops while you're there.
Yeah.
The cops,
and then they're blackmailing you, and the cops come.
and they say you didn't build your fence big enough.
They interrogate you about your locks and
Right,
when was the last time you replaced
Here
them,
are
right?
here are
So,
guidelines for what you needed to do. Right?
We've got a framework for that.
Yeah, we're going to pass a new
and
law
in 2
that
years, they
holds
might
you.
catch one of the guys, and that group's already disbanded and moved in different directions.
I mean,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
infrequently, right?
Yeah.
And it's
There's been a couple recently, but I think it's the response time that's the biggest issue.
Even with the stuff that you go
Yeah,
ahead.
go for it.
I was going to say, even with the stuff where they did the takedowns, were the takedowns really takedowns? Were they effective? Like two guys from a group that
it's not enough,
Right.
right?
3-year investigation, 2 indictments. They have safe harbor in Russia. They'll never be.
It's absolutely crazy to me that and we spend a lot of time working with the FBI. Like, they're very serious about ransomware. If you call them, they'll respond. There's just not a lot they can do.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
They're
And it's it's the same thing. Like, somebody has to prioritize and open up a giant funnel of money like we would spend on something like Ukraine and be like, maybe we need to spend this on protecting American companies. Just one of those little bills, I think, would do a lot.
But is it really even money, right? Or is it more policy?
I think they need,
money would come as a result of a change in policy, but it's really the policy right now where
I think it's both, right? Like, if you look at how many people there are that need to respond to it, when you get an action like the FBI, going and doing that LockBit takedown and tracking those people down and getting them and all of the piece around that is a huge amount of work. And my thought would be, if they had more resources, they could have got more.
Yeah, fair point. My question is just, look, we know that a lot of these people, right, are state-sponsored actions, right, in territories or jurisdictions where we can't get to them in a lot of cases.
So maybe state-sponsored is always like a weird word, but state.
Look the other way.
Yeah, state condoned.
Or
Right?
explicitly not condoned.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely condoned. I don't think we have any.
Like, if this was happening, if it was a U.S. actor doing it against somebody else, the
Done.
U.S. government would come down on him, right?
Yes.
Like, and so that's what's going on in these other jurisdictions.
If we got together at the end of this and said, let's hack the biggest Russian company we could find, and did all that stuff, and they realized it was us, and they went to the U.S. government and said, these guys hacked us and stole our money, the U.S. government would arrest us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? 100% all day long.
Blink of an eye.
Yeah. Yeah, with a smile on their face, and then talk about how they took down these criminals, and it's how law enforcement has really taken to computer hacking in the U.S. for the last 20, 30 years, right?
Well, let's talk a little bit more about these takedowns. All right, so 2 of the most prolific threat actors, LockBit and BlackCat, ALPHV, whichever you prefer to call them. We'll just call them BlackCat for the show. Both had significant law enforcement actions against them in the last 4 or 5 months. Okay, so since LockBit takedown, they've they attacked Trans-Northern Pipelines, Prudential Financial, Loan Depot, and just last week they hit the D.C. Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking, exfiltrated 800 gigabytes of data that they're using for leverage in the extortion. To be fair, we always talk about these groups as LockBit like they're one thing. LockBit's a platform, right? Yeah. Affiliates do the attack.
Well, the macro group will do it too, right? Like,
But they're loose associations,
Yeah.
regardless,
Yeah.
right? There's not a LockBit HQ. Maybe they're
So we're
maybe
gonna
they have an
talk
office.
about them.
oh,
as if they're one-
I guarantee you they have an office and it's so cool.
Sweet. It's a sweet,
Foosball
sweet
everywhere.
office.
Well,
Yeah,
as I
it's
started
like a
mentioning-
volcano base that's a skull.
It's a skull island.
and there's lava coming out of the eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But these groups don't go away, right?
No.
Even with these takedown events, we've seen. I mean, just BlackCat, right? I mean that now that's rebranded to Ransom Hub, right? Prior to that, it was
we
Black
think,
Matter.
and,
we think
and shout out to Orange Cyber for their
Absolutely.
ransomware.
And before that, it was DarkSide and potentially even Fin7. So this is a group that's been operating with impunity for over a decade.
They take their cappuccino maker and they move it next door to the office next door, and they're back up, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's
They have a
happened.
mustache they put on. And
Well, it seems like it's not even that; it splinters into more. So you take down one, and it makes three.
Yeah.
Right.
well, it's like any
Like a
startup
hydra,
will have
yeah.
founders that come from that, and they go, we're entrepreneurs too.
Yeah,
that's it.
That worked great. Like the guys that founded that had a tremendous exit. I would like to have an exit
Well, look,
like
if you could do this return without it being illegal, we'd do it too.
Please,
right? I mean,
everyone watching, there are no
right.
computer crimes laws in Belize.
not that we're advocating.
I
that.
wanna be
investigate
fair
that,
here.
on the ground.
Yeah, let's be fair, and to the credit possibly of these takedowns that Q1 of 24 attacks are down a little bit. They did disrupt two of the biggest.
It's huge, right? Like I hope that they get more momentum and they go bigger and bigger and bigger with the success.
Yeah, but I think you need to see
everybody wants
long-term
to see
results
it.
on that, right? Like a trend is not a point in time; a trend is a trend. And so,
Yeah.
we in 22 we saw stuff
Yeah,
go
this
down.
is
In
the-
23, it was way back up.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, even with Colonial, right? They took down the infrastructure and got some of the ransom payment and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, they're there. There's just not enough, right? It's you're not gonna keep law and order in your Wild
Again,
West town when the marshals weeks
and
right
you know
away.
from all your days of fighting the APT days, right? And
I mean, fist fights,
yeah.
judo chops. We did it all.
But what happened when you burned an operation? They just retooled and
Yeah. I mean, there's
up
no
new
you
infrastructure.
literally build new or you
you
have
never stopped it, right?
You literally have it in concept an armory, right? Like when one tool chain gets burned, you literally just drop it and import a new one and you're back together, right? The weird thing with ransomware is they go through this rebranding process, right? Where they've got to come up with a new name.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's a
new
business.
domain.
It's a business.
They have to
right?
market it to the affiliates on the
Oh,
on the
seriously?
forums,
I mean,
right?
it is.
It really is.
It is. They got to go on the
It's a-
forums.
Well,
and
it's a rug store, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be replaced by another rug store in 6 months.
going out of business.
just like companies in our industry are running out of ways to use cyber, and
Yeah, I
they're
mean,
running out of black and dark names. I think.
there's definitely no lack of opportunities or success for these guys. So looking in the crystal ball forward and seeing anything but essentially a pandemic of this, it's the only probable.
Well, it's a completely uneven, asymmetrical playfield, right? Like any of these takedowns, to your point, it'll take 1, 2, 3 years. It's going to be international cooperation across multiple law enforcement agencies. It's a lot of paperwork to process in the meantime, right? As opposed to a criminal group, which is like, turn that off, turn that on. We're an entirely new thing. So it's the same thing with legislation, where it's always going to be several steps behind where it needs to be, just by the nature of legislation.
Yeah, it's too slow.
It's too
Sure,
slow.
but is there also a component where you look at this and you say, okay, it's really, I think we talked about this at the very start of this, the potential for this, like crossing that line and getting into, cyber terrorism, cyber warfare, like broaching a volumetric or a problematic side where it's outside of the scope of what you would normally associate with law enforcement, right? And it's the same thing like you're seeing in physical warfare, where it's not nation against nation in a formalized way, people with uniforms, right? It's this guerrilla tactic that's really, really effective because it's hard to pin down who it is and go after them. And so is law enforcement really the right thing? Does it change? I mean, I have to say, I'm surprised we stood up
doesn't law enforcement action require attribution as well?
Before we stood up a cyber force.
So the weird thing, my take is attribution is a lot easier than you think, right? Especially when you're dealing with the government. While, normal companies figuring out who the individuals are is more challenging. to an intelligence agency, it's very easy. They understand who the people are. It's just the ability to do something, right? Based on the fact that they're in another country. And, like you said, Ben, I mean, essentially Russia and China and all of the other cyber powers took a completely different stance where they've turned cyber into guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, it's
right?
it's asymmetric, right?
Yeah.
So in a
It's
regular
not
law
people going to
enforcement,
Fort Meade and going into a skiff
No.
and logging in and with the uniform on and
Right.
doing
40
their
layers
ops
of
memo.
approval to do an op.
Yeah. Like, we're going to do this. Oh, we got to deconflict, right? Like, dude, none of that's there. It's just people blasting at it.
Yeah,
because
from
they
a
want
law
to.
enforcement side, they're used to going after somebody who they can go after because the jurisdiction cooperates. They have the ability to hold them responsible for laws. In a military side, like you're going after in warfare capacity, but they've kind of masked these people and say, well, it's not warfare, so we can't go after them from a DoD perspective, but we've isolated them from all the normal actions that law enforcement can take. So there's really not an actor that can go after these threat actors.
No, the government solution is ban ransomware payments, then nobody will pay them and they'll just give up.
Note that a few months ago, the DoD itself got hit, lost some data, and we're waiting for the Department of Justice to tell them how the investigation was.
Oh,
made. So
I
that's-
mean, that's a constant
that's how
thing,
Kafkaesque
right?
this is.
Like, I don't- I mean, in those situations, it's always just discreetly covered up and not discussed. But I mean, I don't think there's any defense contractor out there that I can think of that hasn't been affected by ransomware, right? Or
A large portion of every company has been impacted by ransomware at this point, at least in the U.S. and some of the other.
well, now it's
allies.
it's growing internationally, right? Like they're going after Asian companies, Middle Eastern,
booming market.
Yeah, European, Central South America.
Right.
It's an everyone problem now. Yippee.
So I found this interesting. Volt Typhoon news broke recently. So the U.S. is basically saying this is a Chinese operation. The Chinese came out immediately and said, no, this is a ransomware group. So
by definition, it can't be them because it's a ransomware
it can't be.
group, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so, have we kind of drifted into a space where some of these attacks are proxy actors? I mean, are they also serving a dual purpose for?
I mean, how can it not be, right? Like when you're engaged in cyber war, right, against enemies like Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, right? It's death of a thousand cuts, right? Like how many times can you cause a $1.5 billion loss at one of a numerous amount of healthcare companies before you actually affect, the economy, right? It's, it's the same thing with disinformation. It's not one thing alone that's going to cause something to fall over, but it's a lot of damage that can get done, and it's just speeding up.
Well, and ransomware is the best cover story for any of this too, right? Because it immediately changes the conversation as opposed to, well, this was a plotted attack. This was meant to cause this damage. Oh no, it's just criminal enterprise as criminal enterprise does, right? So
they stole our data.
They stole the data. They're going to sell it on the black market. You're going to get fraudulent credit card charges. When in reality, is like it absolutely is the greatest cover story for any kind of large scale infiltration of an organization. And I don't think we give enough umbrage to that in general. Like there's a huge dual nature potential for any one of these attacks.
Well, and as a nation state, right? If you're an APT, you can go join their affiliate program and use their tools.
Yeah.
Sure.
So you even have the signature ability of a ransomware group.
Right.
So you mentioned payment bans, right? Now I'm a fan of the concept, right? Because I think it would get in front of the problem and kind of solve the motivation for it, right? Which is the only way you kind of get in front of it at the end of it. I don't know when it will happen, if it will happen. I'm not really sure whether there's a lot of reasons potentially it's not feasible. Like what would you do if life or limb?
Yeah. I think it's truly un-American.
But there actually is like a payment ban already in place, right?
Yeah.
OFAC guidance, I think from like 21 or something came out, and they said like if it's for one of these countries or someone affiliated with one of these countries, like
sanctioned entities.
you can't make that payment. Yet we know that's still going on.
So they've
and there's not enforcement.
They've offset the risk, right? Now instead of the company that's ransomware making the payment, you go to a third party and they make the payment on your behalf, right? And this is something that we've gone through at Halcyon, where we've come in after someone's been ransomwared and restored their network. How do you go to a CEO that has a company full of employees that they're responsible for and say, you're not allowed to pay the ransom? We get that your business is going to shut down. Oh, well, right? Yeah. It's for the greater good. Right? Like that, there's something about that. Yeah, there's something about that that's very anti-capitalism to me.
Yeah, but from
if
a
you're not
capitalist
going to
standpoint,
be there.
But isn't that where the government could step in, right? To offer,
It's
like,
the
if you're going to
easiest-
invest money,
it's
like
the
support
easiest
that
solution.
company and bring them back, help bring them back out of it and get them.
I mean, that would be
solvent
way
again, right?
amazing, right?
Because
If
they're
the
still not
government
making the
stepped in.
payment, so the motivation
Yeah.
goes away. But the government is supporting those companies either in remediation efforts or recovery, whatever it is, right?
Would you be excited if when you were CISOing you got ransomware and the government called up and said, "Don't worry, Ben, you can't pay. We'll rebuild you."
Yeah,
How long
what's
do
that
you
saying
think
about
that would take?
the worst words in the English language? Or don't worry,
Yeah.
the government's here to help.
Yeah,
And by the way,
they're doing a great job in Hawaii. I've heard they've already rebuilt that whole area.
I mean more from like like stepping in on the private side and helping and paying for the remediation or something, right? Like kind of almost like a federal insurance program around that, right?
I mean, I think that would be huge if you could go to someone that's been ransomed and they're like, "This is going to take me 6 weeks to recover. I can't float. Like, I don't have that much profit to pay that with that downtime." And if the government would come in and say, "We'll cover the payroll until you get up and running." Yeah, I mean, I think that becomes really,
That's
really
kind of what we
compelling.
saw with Change, right? Change had to sort of escrow out a certain amount of payments that would be paid back to their own clients for the bill processing in order to cover their own, IT
I
rebuilding.
guess I'm saying like the everybody brings up these problems with like you couldn't stop paying ransom because these events would happen. I'm saying like there's potential solutions for that if you want to think out of the
I
box.
think Kim
Absolutely.
Sender was just tweeting last week. I think it was Kim that it's just going to create a black market for
payment, right?
negotiation.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
it
gonna be
already
30
You could say even
It already
that's
exists.
illegal. Like you can't make a payment on behalf of somebody for like there.
just
there
put
again,
it
just
in
have
a shell in front of it.
you just have a a Bahamian shell, and they're the ones that.
Right.
Wait,
It's,
isn't
you
there
get
a
the
trial right
taxation
now
sandwich.
about somebody making third-party payments for something? We won't go into that.
Well, I mean, there was Joe, right, at Uber, where he got breached, and then they negotiated a ransom, and then he paid them, and then they arrested him.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, well, again, another instance of a CISO being in the crosshair, right? Like,
Yeah, which is just further going to make security a harder challenge. Like that, it's absolutely not the right approach.
Yeah. I mean, what are you supposed to do when you're the CISO and something happens and it's like, well, I gotta make the decision to get the business up and running. Like that's my job. I've got to ensure availability. And they're like, and we're going to, go after you personally, criminally. Like it's insane. How are CISOs supposed to afford hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal defense? Right.
well, I think that's where you're seeing a bit of an exodus, right? Some of the guys who've been in the industry longest are kind of stepping out and trying to figure out, okay, how do I go to vendor land? How do I go on advising? How do I do whatever that you want to do? That's
I've never
outside
had
that
a
scope?
conversation like that. Maybe being a CISO isn't so great.
Yeah, it can be. It's just it's like, what's the support, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to just layer on the problems for the CISOs, I mean, talent. My God, right? Like being able to find talent to staff out a team, it just takes so long to get good at security. There's a finite amount of resources there.
It's a challenge at every level, from legislation to staffing and resources to making the board understand the concern.
At least the boards are
enormous.
freaked out now, right? Like I think more than ever before, boards are scared about the threat of ransomware and what it can do to the business.
Right. Well, I think going back to the market cap discussion, it's a very simple conversation at that point. Of,
Yeah, it is.
This happened and we dropped X%.
Yeah, and that calls out to like, why isn't there more representation on boards from a cyber perspective. I mean, you want to talk about diversity, let's really talk about diversity, like getting people on who are actually can address the risks, right? Whatever that is, right? Get the right person on there. And I think there's so many boards that don't have anybody that can actually deal with it and understand what's going on, right?
And for those out there listening that have boards they'd like to educate on ransomware, Ben will fly wherever.
He's happy to chat with you. So I'm kind of curious about, other things that have been done, like the release of decryptors and stuff. And I'll note that so an article just came out that Akira has brought in like 42 million. Akira's been around, year plus?
Yeah, I mean,
that's
longer than
confirmed,
years,
but
yeah.
you just assume it's got to be more than that. But that was
Yeah.
CISO, Europol, and
250
I forget who
companies,
else.
42.
Right.
Yeah.
So-
And the FBI, right? So-
I recall very early after Akira started kind of making itself known as one of the more active groups, there was a vendor we won't name that released a decryptor. Akira's going strong. I mean, they're tracking.
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
climbing the.
It's
the
a problem
rankings.
with decryptors, right? So it's like that old 0-day adage where you have a 0 day and what's the use of it, right? Where normally you can't use it for good. It's not like going out and hacking somebody with a 0 day has a positive outcome. But with ransomware decryptors, it's the exact opposite. Like, you should shut up. You should reach out to the FBI. They have a specific group for each ransomware team. And then you should let the FBI direct you to the victims and just keep decrypting them, right? Forever until the ransomware group figures out that there's a problem there and
John,
fixes
I'm
it.
in marketing, and this would be great press release, and maybe we can get a blip in computers.
I guess, right?
Isn't that more important?
I think that a lot of that's really gone away, right? Like, once we started getting into the genre of like named bugs, the actual discoverers, right? Like, it was
Hard to believe.
Avast, right? Was it Trend Micro? Somebody that did the Akira decryptor.
I think it was Avast.
There you go, Avast, right? It's really hard for people to retain that anymore, right? Where it used to be like, oh, did you see the bug that Ryan did, right? And it was Ryan's bug, and Ryan worked here, and it all came. Now it's just like this constant feed where the reporters don't really report it anymore. When they talk about the vulnerability, they don't mention the company that found it. They don't mention the researcher that found it. It's just the vulnerability, like it's a commodity.
And the impact.
Well,
Yeah. Well, of course. Yeah.
after Microsoft basically made it a monthly holiday to
Super
celebrate
Tuesday.
all the
Yeah.
the holes in their. Can you believe how easily basically businesses and in this industry just accepted that as a like every month you're gonna.
I mean, it's not just that. It seems like more common than not, Microsoft keeps getting hacked, right? Like, it's just happened multiple times now, and I mean, this is the scary thing about something being so foundational like Microsoft. You get to a point where it is a guarantee that other nations have spies working in Microsoft as developers, right? So you end up where a company gets too big, and because they're not a defense contractor, it's not, things aren't treated top secret, and there aren't in-depth background checks and all of this. And
I think
the system wasn't inherently built to be secure.
Didn't just 2-3 weeks ago we see an instance where a developer had put in a little back door.
Well, it was Microsoft developer, I believe, or engineer. You're talking about the ZX, I think it was ZX utils, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, I guess that's the danger in open source supply chain.
I mean, how
issues
many
as
of
well.
those do you think have gone undiscovered over the years, right?
Just open source or any. I mean, how much code is
Yeah,
Microsoft cranking out?
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
On
it's
both sides.
yeah, I think it's both. I mean, it's really hard to look for open source from that perspective and say, like, you're going to use something from open source and just trust it, right? And
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
what are you going
everyone's
to do?
been auditing it.
Yeah. So internally, I mean, that's more of what you were talking about, an internal plan, the insider threat, the internal espionage, right? Corporate to corporate, but also nation state to corporate, right? Like,
how do you
that's
protect
prevalent.
against your source code leaking when you have to give the source code access to people and have them extend it?
Yeah.
Right? There has to be that trust. And once you get big enough and you're a big enough target, there's nothing you can do to protect yourself against it. Right? Like they'll just do what it takes.
Well, this was a cheery conversation.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, everything's great.
It's always positive.
Yeah.
Things are wonderful.
Let's leave them with something happy. What is working against ransomware, John?
The Halcyon, man. We just knocked that stuff out like a fat kid at a donut shop, right? I think that there are a bunch of spots where companies can really up their game, right? MFA, huge, right? Running an EDR, right? Also super important. It helps if you have it all the way turned on, right? I guess the sweet lining here is the ransomware groups, for better or for worse, are a business, right? So you can get to a point where the adage of an advanced enough attacker with the motivation can penetrate you, right? Like that was the birth of, it was the birth of EDR. The ransomware breaks that. Like they are not willing to put in unlimited time to breach someone. It's a business. They
Raise
want
the cost
ROI.
for them, right? Raise the cost so it's more expensive where they move on to somebody else. I mean, unfortunately, that's the truth. But
and the key thing there for companies that want to protect themselves against it is you need to educate yourself. Like, what are the ransomware groups that are targeting your industry? What are their TTPs? Like, the information's available. I love the ransomware MQ that we have where we go into a lot of those. Great place to start. But this is a solvable problem. It's horrible, everywhere right now, but it's definitely something where companies can win at it. It's just not without effort.
Very good.
Agreed.
yep.
Okay, we have the big event of the year, RSA, coming up.
Yeah, so this episode should be out before May 6th, I believe. So for those that are attending RSA that are listening here, we'd love to see you catch a demo live at our booth. We're on the show floor, kind of in between North and South Hall. We're also offering, obviously, private demos and sort of like a little bit more of our roadmap discussions as well. All of that's available to register at halcyon.ai.
Aren't we giving away something really cool?
We do our normal giveaway of a very custom hand-painted guitar by our very own Dave Bonvillain. We'll be doing that again at RSA. And for all those details, halcyon.ai is the place to go to register for that.
And that's like a one of a
How much do the Bonvillain guitars sell for? The last one that I
between
saw
0
was,
and 20,000.
This is the guy who makes
$22,000?
guitars for like Steve Vai.
Yeah, Ibanez, dude.
Right.
Yeah. Right. He's a big deal. He's a big deal. And if you're interested in learning more about Halcyon, he'll get on a Zoom with you, show you his guitar collection, and then tell you how Halcyon works.
Absolutely. I think also we have our ransomware, our latest ransomware power rankings is coming out or is out.
Yep. Yeah, I just finished
shortly.
Just finished the draft, and so it will be coming out.
Fantastic. So obviously some big changes with that, especially around the takedowns. Like there's some rapid movement on that. So that's also available on Halcyon AI.
LockBit is not at the top of the leader squad.
Wow, you're giving a sneak preview, an exclusive
did
here for the pod.
Did BlackCat take over?
News.
I can't tell you yet.
Oh,
you're gonna have to wait like everybody else. John.
Fingers crossed.
We've also got the recent ransomware attack site where we track ransomware, and we've just made a big advancement of that. We're going to be able to track even more attacks in real time, almost real time, as soon as they're reported. And then follow us on social,
Yep, absolutely.
And
if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, potentially, you can email us at podcast@halcyon.ai as well. And we'll be back next month with some more wrap-ups. I think we've talked a lot about change, and I know Change Healthcare is one of the biggest things that's happened this year. But the ransomware game is always advancing and moving. So we'll be back next month with a new guest, and Ben Carr as well back on in a few weeks. But John, thanks for joining us. And
thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Always a
everyone.
pleasure.
Yeah, great times.